We're going to look at migrating from SalesLogix LAN to SalesLogix Web, and your presenter today is Scott Weber. Just a couple things before we begin. You may have noticed that your line is placed on mute. However, if you come up with any questions during this workshop, please post those to the question log, and I will try and get to as many of them during the presentation as possible. But any that I don't get to, I will pass along to Scott at the end, and we can answer them there. But that's all I have, so I'm going to hand over the controls to Scott.
Thank you, Bree, and thanks again, everybody, for joining us again today. If you've sat in on these before, hopefully this one will be as interesting as some of the ones in the past. It's part of our Demystifying SalesLogix series, and we are planning on more of these in the future, so stay tuned for more of this interesting stuff. Today we're going to kind of talk about the actual process and what to expect when you're migrating. And we talked a little bit about this internally also, that when we talk about migrating, it's really, when you implement the SalesLogix web components, the web client, it's really in addition to what you already have. And so it's not a replacement of the LAN client, and we'll touch on that with some of the FAQs that we're going to get into here as well. So just a point of clarification. It also, in this presentation, we're going to talk a lot about what we call FAQs. These are things that we hear about from a lot of our customers and prospects. They ask us a lot of the same questions because there's some of the same, I guess, mystery out there, hence the name, about, okay, what does it really take to get to the web and what should we expect? So we'll get into a little bit of a FAQ on that. And one of the main reasons why companies are contemplating going to the web client is that it really is the part of SalesLogix where most of their development resources, and it's driven by the industry really, and that's to get to a true thin client and get away from installed software on workstations. We're trying to lower the overall cost of ownership. We're trying to gain some of the more leading, better features available, and so forth, convenience of a web client. And so those are a lot of things we hear. A lot of it comes from IT just wanting to get away from a lot of the cost of ownership, cost of maintenance, and maintaining a dispersed application across lots of workstations. So because obviously the web is accessed through a browser, you really only have to maintain it in one place in a central spot. So that's one of the main drivers we see. Next is, what kind of changes should the users expect? And I'll tell you, I would say that if you haven't seen the web client, SalesLogix did a good job of making it very, very similar as far as the user experience. So going from the LAN to the web, it should be a very familiar and a very comfortable switch. They do access it through a browser rather than launching a Windows application, but once they get there, you'll see a very familiar design, the nav bar on the left, toolbar across the top, and the same accounts, contacts, opportunities, calendars, activities, all the things you're accustomed to are pretty much going to be there in the same place they always have been. So it's a very, very familiar experience. And what I like about it, too, is they can obviously access it from anywhere in the world where you have internet connectivity. So they could be working from home one day and use their CRM system just as they could if they were sitting in the office or from a customer site or a Starbucks or wherever they happen to be. That's certainly one of the advantages of the web deployment option. Next, we're going to talk about hardware and software requirements. Sage does publish a very detailed document that goes into all the minutiae of what all you need to be ready for this. And we'll just briefly talk about some of the high points on that one. And as I said, we'll talk about some FAQs. And then we'll do a demonstration of making a customization or a modification in the web, because it is a different tool. If you've done any customizations in the LAN, there is a new application called the Application Architect that gets installed, and it's in that application that you make changes to the web screens. So I'll do a quick demonstration of how to do that as well. Okay, so first question we get asked a lot is, how long does this take? And the answer is, once you've got all the server hardware basically installed and configured, and again, Sage does a great job of documenting all this, so I'm not going to go into all of that detail and repeat it here during today's presentation, but I can tell you that you order your upgrade kit, which you can do either through your business partner or Sage customer service. It's going to come with the documentation on those disks. So they do a great job, like I said, and go into great detail about what it takes to get ready for installing the software, setting up the web server, and so forth. But we typically tell clients that if you're going to do it yourself, which you certainly can do, plan on maybe 1 to 2 days to get everything up and running. Next thing we hear is SalesLogix a 64-bit application, and the answer is no. It is a 32-bit. All the components are 32-bit, but a lot of our customers do implement it on 64-bit servers and workstations. So there's definitely advantages in the amount of memory that a 64-bit machine can utilize. There's great advantages to that, but SalesLogix and its components are 32-bit native for now. Certainly that will change in the future, but it does work just fine on 64-bit servers and workstations. The other thing we hear is, can I install everything on one server? You can buy some really big servers today, and the price continues to go down. The answer is yes. In fact, on the installation disk that you get from Sage, there is the option to do what they call the express installation, and that is going to install all the various back-end components onto one box versus a distributed system, which is really what we recommend. You can do it with one server. We do have clients who do it successfully on one server. You just have to be careful about how you manage the resources on that box and make sure everything is happy with what it's got. Next question we hear is, will I have all the latest service packs and hot fixes when I'm done? Am I going to be at the latest SalesLogix level based on the disks I receive from Sage? And the answer is no. When you receive your upgrade kit from Sage, it's going to have a DVD that's going to have the 754 and the latest service pack, which is Service Pack 4. So it's going to already have 1, 2, 3, and 4 installed. So when you do install the software, when you're all done clicking next, 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 you are going to be at Service Pack 4, and that is the latest service pack available for the 7. Release. However, there are 4 additional updates, or hot fixes they call them, that can be downloaded and installed from the Sage support site. We highly recommend you do that. There's some pretty critical things, and that's typically what hot fixes are. They fix critical issues, and we definitely recommend that before you go live with the system that you do install all the additional updates. It just takes a few minutes to do each one, and they do have documentation on exactly how to accomplish that. So the latest level would be 754, SP4, and hotfixer updates 1, 2, 3, 4. And then, yes, you'd be up to the latest level. And what are the server requirements is the next question. And again, today's webinar is focusing on customers who are already at 754 LAN, or maybe you're planning to get to 754 LAN. And so, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the web is really an addition to that. It's not a replacement of your LAN system in any way. It does not uninstall anything. It doesn't change anything that has to do with your LAN implementation. We don't touch the database. We don't remove anything. And so it really is just an extension of the LAN application. And so there is also a compatibility checklist that's available from the support site. They frequently update that. And so as long as you download the latest version of that document, you're going to know exactly what you need on your servers, what it's compatible with, what versions of SQL, what versions of .NET, and which versions of IIS, and all the other common components. But in a nutshell, the web server and the website is going to operate on a Windows Server 2003 or 8 box, and it does require IIS, which has to be activated and configured on that server. What I will tell you is the compatibility checklist, we think, is severely underrated as far as what they tell you. is the minimum requirement for RAM. I think they say something like 1 or 2 gigs of RAM is all you need. We think that that would be a mistake. We highly recommend that the server has at least 4 gig of RAM, and we all know how cheap RAM is these days. So there's definitely a visible, tangible difference. For the most part, the more RAM you can devote to the SalesLogix website, the faster it's going to run. And again, as cheap as RAM is, it's an easy decision to beef up the box. And also they recommend, obviously, multiple processors. And again, the faster the processors to a point, the better the performance and user experience is going to be for the web users. Next, what are the workstation requirements? And there, again, I'm going to refer you to the SalesLogix compatibility checklist. There is a section in there that talks about the workstation requirements, and it will run virtually on any Windows XP Service Pack 3 or higher. There's still a lot of XP machines out there. They work just fine. Then we have Vista available, not so good. And Windows 7 operating system, either 64 or 32-bit, works great. And again, we recommend, even though Sage says 1 gig of RAM, I don't even know if I could boot a machine with 1 gig of RAM these days, but we say at least 4 gig of RAM on the workstation or laptop, depending on what you're running it on. And then finally, because it is a browser-based app, your users are going to need IE 7, 8, or 9, and I threw an asterisk there because currently it's not certified and supported on IE 9. However, IE 9 has a compatibility mode. It's just a box or a little icon you check, and you can tell it anytime you run the SalesLogix web client to launch that page in the compatibility mode. And we have lots of customers that have no issues with running IE 9 in that compatibility mode. We had Firefox on this list also, but it's only compatible with 3.6, which Mozilla stopped supporting, and in fact, they're now nagging you every time you log in to Firefox 3.6. They're nagging you to upgrade to version 12 of Firefox, which is not compatible and is going to have issues with the SalesLogix web client. But you can certainly try it and see how it works for you. But we're just going with what we know and what SalesLogix supports. Okay, next question, does all of my data migrate, including my custom fields? And the answer is yes, because the web client uses the same database as the LAN client. Both the LAN and the web point at the same SalesLogix database. And when you implement the web, it does not alter your database. And so all the same information, all your accounts, contacts, opportunities, tickets, and so forth, all the history and attachments, that's all going to be there exactly as it is today. So the answer is all your data is going to be there. Now, the caveat here is that if you have customizations, you've added fields or modified screens in the LAN client, and you want to match those customizations in the web, you would have to add those fields or make those changes in the web client as one of the steps in your migration process. And again, I'm going to show you that at the end today, just how to quickly do that for a simple adding a field to the screen. But the data is there. Will my pick list be there? The answer is yes. All the pick lists tied to all the fields are going to be the same in the web client. However, the web client stores the properties for pick lists in a different place. I'm not sure technically why, but what that means is if you've done anything to the properties of a pick list, like text must match a list item, or you've changed the sort order, you will have to go into the pick list manager, and I have a little screenshot of that. So the administrator in the web client can go to the pick list manager, and they will have to configure those properties, if you want to replicate what they're doing over in the LAN client. But all the values are there when the user clicks on the list. Next is, will my attachments, speed search folders, and library documents be there? And the answer there is yes. as long as you keep them in the same directory, which of course you can or you would, because again, the LAN client, if you keep it, will still be pointing to those documents as well. And if you have them organized in any kind of folders and children folders, all that same structure carries over automatically into the web. So the library is going to look and act virtually identical in the web as it does in the LAN. No extra work needs to be done here to get that to happen. It's just going to magically work just the way it does in the LAN. Next question is, will my reports still work? A lot of people absolutely use Crystal reports and rely on those, and the answer is yes. Because the data structure is the same, it's the same database. If you launch your reports from the browser area of the reports, again in my little screenshot you'll see it, you're going to have the same subgroupings of reports. All your same reports, your Crystal reports will be there, and the answer is yes, you can run those. I'll mention here that as part of the implementation, one of the things you'll be doing is it'll ask you to install the Crystal Reports web server. So with your SalesLogix Web license, you have a Crystal web server, and it's that little web server component installs on the same box now, or it doesn't have to, but it can. That is what hosts the reports. So your reports are actually going to open up in a browser window right over the top of SalesLogix, and you can save them as a PDF just like you can in the LAN client if you want. But the reports themselves work just fine, work just the same. Next question we hear about is, will my groups be saved? As you know, SalesLogix allows groups and filters, and a lot of these groups are static, others are dynamic. Will they be there? Yes. You do not have to recreate your groups because the web client uses the same mechanism for storing and building and modifying groups as the LAN. So any groups you've got built today and any that the users have built for personal use will still be there, just the same as they are in the LAN. So that, again, no extra steps involved there. Next question we hear about a lot is, will the LAN system still be functional, and can we use both? And the answer is yes. You absolutely can use both. Again, because the web is an extension and it's an addition to the LAN. We don't overwrite, we don't delete anything on any workstation. The LAN client will still be there unless you purposely uninstall it from your users' workstations. And we do definitely have some clients who use both, and there's no issue with that. And in fact, I'll add that, as a user, I could log into either one of them. The system doesn't care. I could log in and use the LAN one day. I could go home and work from home and use the web client the next day, and everything works just fine. So there's no reason you can't use both. It kind of runs counter to what I mentioned earlier about, well, why would we go to the web? You've actually, instead of decreasing the maintenance and the workload on IT, you've actually, virtually doubled it if you're going to continue to use both. We typically suggest, for all those reasons, you settle on the web, get rid of the LAN, and that works just great for most clients, but you're not forced to do that. You can use both if you have a business driver that requires that. Next question is, will I lose any features or capabilities if I go to the web? And that's been a bit of a moving target. And when the SalesLogix web client first came out, the answer would be quite different because it wasn't complete. It didn't have all the features and functions of the LAN client. But SalesLogix developers have been busy over the years, and they've been constantly and continuously adding to various service packs and so forth. They've been adding more and more of the same functionality that was in the LAN into the web. And so today, 7.5.4 is virtually identical. There's very little difference. There's no missing features or functions per se, with a couple of minor exceptions. But one of the things you can't do in the web that you can do in the LAN is some of the administrator functions, like the ability to replace data, do bulk duplicate checks, and merge duplicate records in bulk. That still has to be done through the tools menu, and there's a little screenshot of it in the LAN client. And again, that's an admin function. That's not the sort of things users would be doing typically. And so from their seat, they are not going to be missing any features. Will contact processes still work? And this has got a qualified yes. Contact processes do still work in the web client. And so the difference, though, is that those of you that are using contact processes, there's different types of contact processes. If you build one and use one that requires interaction by the user, and a lot of times what that would mean is, let's say I have a process that has a phone call, and a phone call followed by a letter that gets written. You can tell the process to pop up a screen in the LAN client and say, okay, you made the first call. Do you want to send the form letter now thanking them for the call? And you can't have that kind of process running in the web. You can still run a process, but you have to remove any of the interactive steps where the user has to answer a question in a pop-up screen. Those will not run. They'll run, but they'll stop when you get to the point where the user has to interact. And so you'll just have to sort of rethink your processes and make sure they run completely automated. Now, also, you have to be logged into the LAN client today as a user to get your scheduled process to actually scan and run. So the way the web client takes care of that for you is it automatically schedules any contact processes from the web against a user called process. Very clever. So there's a user called process, and all contact processes for contacts in the web are assigned to that process user. And what you would do as an administrator is somewhere on your server or somewhere, you would log into the LAN client as the process user. Now, once you do that, once you're logged in as this process user, its job is to scan all the active processes and move them all forward as the users complete the steps. So not as sophisticated as the LAN client, but the meat of what processes do is still available to you using this simple process user. Okay, can I still have remote database users? Again, this is a little bit contrary to why you might be considering the web, because you want to get away from remote database users. But if you still have a strong need to have offline remote, the answer is yes. They call it the disconnected web client. And the disconnected web client uses the sync server, if you've got that today, uses the same sync server and the same sync engine that the LAN remote client used. So that mechanism all works the same, does the same thing, delivers the changes to the remote and vice versa. And so as a remote user using the disconnected web client, I am logging into a local copy of the web interface. So it is the web with all your customizations in it for an offline user and a little MySQL database running on that laptop. And so it looks identical, it works identical. You can have all of your records on there if you want. You can have your whole database on the remote user's laptop if you want to, or filter it with rules, your choice. But the answer is it's exactly the same user experience as though they were connected to the live database, but you can have it in this disconnected web client. Very cool feature. Next is, does the web client run on an iPad or other tablet device? And the answer is, yeah, kind of. As you know, there is a mobile client for iPhones, iPads, Android devices, any touchscreen tablet that has a browser that supports HTML5 can use the SalesLogix Mobile. But the SalesLogix Mobile does not have all the same features as the full-blown web client. So we do have customers that say, I really want the whole thing running on my iPad. The answer is yes. You can run SalesLogix on the Safari browser on your iPad. However, there's limitations. Obviously, it's a really tiny screen. And as you can see in my little screenshot, it can be a little tough to read because everything is really condensed and compressed. The resolution is fairly low on an iPad compared to a desktop or a laptop. Also, there's no right mouse button. I don't know how to right mouse click with my finger You can't do that on an iPad, and a lot of the menus and functions in the web client are right-click enabled. But typically, you can do the same things in a right-click menu as you can with the drop-downs and other icons. So it's just a little bit of a learning curve to figure that out. So yes, you can use it. Some things work, some things don't work great. Obviously, there's no desktop integration with Outlook or Word merge forms or your calendars and so forth, because none of those software packages exist on an iPad. Okay, final part of the presentation now. I'm going to show you how to add a field in the SalesLogix web. And so what we're going to start with is, here's the SalesLogix web client, and this is just basically an out-of-the-box system. So take a look at the screen, and we're going to add a field to this screen. So I've opened up the application architect. This is that new application I mentioned earlier. The application architect comes with the web. It's going to be on the CD. You can install it on a server, run it from any workstation. And it is what I would call, it's kind of old school, but it's a WYSIWYG type of application where what you see on the screen in the application architect matches what you see in the SalesLogix client. So if I drag this down, you'll see, yeah, there's the main phone number in the middle of the screen, the type field in the upper right corner, and so forth. So it's a one-for-one relationship. You can drag these fields around on the screen just by highlighting them and moving them if you want to and letting them go. But what I'm going to do today is I'm going to right-click in this gray area, and I'm going to say insert a new field. So you have all these different kinds of fields you can add, but I'm just going to say a plain old text box field. And as you can see, it added it where I started from, but I can move this thing around. If I want it under the address or want it over on the right, you can just drag it around. That's all I'm doing. Now, the first thing I might want to do is, well, what am I going to call this field? And I'm going to call it the AKA field, because this particular, a lot of our customers have AKAs. I don't know if they're foreign or what they are. But so we have an AKA field, that's the caption, and when I add that in, you can see there's my label. So it's put the label AKA on that field for me, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add it or bind a field in the database to that field. So you have to have a field in the database that's going to store that data that the users are going to put in there, and so that's the next step, is to open up the data bindings over here on the properties window. And I'm going to find a field that I already created called AKA. Very clever. So I'm just going to say map that to this AKA field, map the AKA field to the AKA field on the screen, and click OK. And so now that's what's happened. So now the AKA label is down to the AKA field. Very logical. And this is exactly where I want it to be, so I'm good to go. Now, all these customizations I'm doing, I can just keep going if I want to keep modifying other screens and so forth. This is all being done offline. I'm not altering the SalesLogix system. My users can be working away on it throughout the day as I'm making these changes offline. So the application architect is offline. It's doing it in a sandbox. And when I'm all done making my changes, there's two steps you have to perform. One is to build the web platform, and I'll simplify it by saying that's going to take all the changes I made throughout the day and save them all into web pages, SalesLogix web pages. And then the final thing I would do is deploy the portal. And by deploying the client, by clicking on the deploy button, that moves all those pages that just created off into the production website. So now I'm going to be replacing SalesLogix screens with the new screens I created, and that one new screen has the AKA field. So once I hit deploy and then jump back to SalesLogix, what I'm going to end up with is there's my AKA field, and I could put in here, you know, something like Abbott Labs. That's what they used to be called or are sometimes called, and I'm done. So there's my new field sitting on the screen. You can add as many as you want. This is where you'd add your custom fields back in to the web client if you've got some. I can delete fields if I don't want them, drag things around, organize it however I want. Okay, well, Bree, that kind of concludes what we were hoping to show today. Do we have any open questions?
We do, and I think you answered some of them during the presentation, but it wouldn't hurt to reiterate.
Yeah.
The first one I have is it fully supported running in a virtualized environment?
That's a great question. Yes. That is, in many cases, that's how many of our clients have deployed it. So the answer is yes. And in fact, if you're considering the cloud version of SalesLogix Web, that's actually what you're getting, is you're getting a couple big virtual servers in the Amazon jungle on their big server farm wherever they are in the world. So yeah, the cloud is virtualized. You can use your own server virtualization solution on premise, and absolutely it's happy, in that kind of environment.
All right, the next one is, if we're on 7.2 LAN, do we have to go to 7.5 LAN before we can go to the web? And can we run the LAN along with the web version?
I think what they mean is, do they have to upgrade to the 7.5.4 LAN?
Right.
And the answer is, you don't have to. No. There is a 7.5.2 and a 7.5.3 version of the web client. So the answer is you do not. You can deploy, an older dot version. Anything basically above 7.0 had this web client. Obviously, they're making improvements and changes. We always recommend the latest version, 7.5.4. But the simple answer to your question is, if you're on 7.5.2 LAN, you do not have to upgrade to 7.5.4 to use the web client. You can deploy the 7.5.2 web client.
Okay. And we did go over this, but you can answer it again, is what about using this on Firefox or Chrome?
You can run it in any browser. That's not a problem at all. The problem comes in with the desktop integration. And the desktop integration is a little applet that runs in the tray of your workstation. And the Desktop Manager applet is what drives the Outlook integration and the drag and drop capabilities from emails into the web. And it drives the synchronization of emails. That doesn't work with anything other than IE or Firefox 3.6 right now. That's changing. That's a problem, especially now that Firefox 3.6 that nags you to upgrade every time you launch it. So will it run in Chrome? Absolutely. Runs like the wind in Chrome. However, you will not have desktop integration and Outlook integration because of it.
Okay. I'm assuming there's no way to bundle LAN customizations and then install them on the web. Do we have to recreate every single customization?
You have to recreate every single customization. Not the data. The data is there, so the database and any changes you've made, custom fields, custom tables, but any scripts, any new fields or changes to the forms do have to be 100% replicated, to have like-for-like functionality. You do have to build those, unfortunately, from scratch in that application architect.
Okay.
We wish it was simpler than that, but it's not.
The web client on the iPad, can it be integrated with the iPad email system?
Nope, doesn't work at all. No, that's does not.
Okay. For end-user licenses, are web licenses required, or can remote network and concurrent licenses access the web client?
That is another great question. And the answer to that one has changed over the years, because back in the earlier days, for those that have been around in like the early 5.2, 4.0, 6.2, you had to buy web client licenses separately. You had to pay extra to get their crappy web, client that nobody used. Now, this newest, greatest web client, all your licenses are universal. And so for every named user, every concurrent user, those are automatically web licenses. And so it's one for one. No extra licenses need to be purchased. Now, one thing I'll mention on that topic is you do have a new license type that you can buy, and some of you that have had SalesLogix a while, you maybe have some of these. You can buy a web viewer license for like $100, and that allows users, your whole company if you want, to be able to have a license to read only, to be able to log into SalesLogix and look stuff up, look at data, run the groups and filters and things. You can even add notes and activities for a very inexpensive web viewer license. And what I was getting at is those of you that have had SalesLogix for a while, they were giving away 50 user blocks of those web viewer licenses. So I would encourage you to look to see if you have those licenses, because if you do deploy the web, you might have 50 free web viewer licenses that are named users read-only available to you. We run across that a lot. People don't know what those are because they never deployed the web. Well, they work great in the new web client.
Okay, this is a good one, just so that everyone knows. Will this webinar be available after the meeting?
Yes, the whole thing's been recorded. We'll have it posted within maybe a half hour or so.
Okay.
On our YouTube channel.
Yep, at www.youtube.com/customerfx.
Yeah.
Okay, next question is, we're on version 7.5.0. Where do we get the service packs?
The SalesLogix support site. So if you're current on maintenance, you will have a login and password to the SalesLogix support website. And if you hit that site, you'll be able to download all the service packs we talked about today to get you to 7.5.4 and these hotfix adapters. And so all that's available for download. All the documentation is up there through the support website.
Okay. Next question we have is, how are .NET Managed Assembly plugins handled on the web version?
It's too technical for me.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that. I know how to spell it, but that's about it. But we can definitely take that question offline and ask one of our rockstar developers.
All right. How does Exchange Link work in the web environment?
That's a great question. It works really well. And actually, you know, we sold a little bit of that over the years. We've actually had a lot of interest in that now that a lot of companies are going to the web. They don't want to run the IntelliSync desktop integration. They just want to go server to server. And so there's a new version of Exchange Link that's come out recently. It works great. Copies calendar items and contacts between Exchange and the back end. And so that's a great solution for these web deployments. Great solution.
Okay. Does the database size affect the speed of SalesLogix Web?
You know, it can. I will say that it usually is not a bottleneck unless it's just a gigantic database with millions of records. But if you're having good performance with your LAN client today and it's not bottlenecked because of a giant database, the web client really isn't affected by that. It uses some pretty sophisticated paging technology, so it's only bringing up subsets of data into the screens rather than trying to read millions of history records or something. So, you know, it can affect it, but if you've got sufficient hardware and RAM and, you know, bandwidth and all that, we've got clients with huge 30, 50 gig databases with millions of records that it runs just fine.
Okay. Next question is, if you're running this on a virtual server, should it still have multiple processors on the physical server that are dedicated to the virtual server?
More is better. So the answer is yes. If you can, if the big box can spare, we definitely have some tricks and tips that we've learned over the years for those virtual environments. There's definitely a bit of an art to tuning virtual boxes, and that comes from understanding what the demands of the application is really making on that box. And so, you know, I would encourage you to reach out either to your business partner or we can help you too. or Sage support to help you kind of tune and tweak those virtual boxes so that everything is getting what it needs. But the general rule is the more resources you can give it, the faster and better it's going to run.
Okay.
To a point.
Right. Can you have nested pick lists in the web client?
I'm not sure what that means, a nested pick list. Is that where, like, maybe this is what the question is. If I choose a type and that type is suspect, it drives the values available to me in the subtype. And so depending on what I chose in type determines what I have to choose from in subtype. So I think if I change that to customer, that subtype is going to be different. It's a different list of subtypes. That's what I think. That's what a nested is, but I'm not positive.
Okay. Well, let's see here. I lost my spot in all these questions. Sorry about that. I clicked on the wrong button and I think I'm almost there.
Okay.
Okay. Will mass mailings work if the user is on a Mac, or does he have to be on a PC?
Yeah, PC. The mail merge engine uses ActiveX controls, and that's only available on a PC. So you would not have mass mailing. Now, unless you're using SwiftPage, the marketing solution, that does work just fine through a Mac. But the native, mail merge functions for mass mailing is not going to work on a Mac. It requires Word, only the PC version. It requires ActiveX capability, and so unfortunately it does not work.
Okay. Oh, back to the nested pick list question.
Yeah.
That is what the user is wondering, and she's wondering if she can do that on customized fields as well.
Yes, absolutely. That's a script or plugin that's available and can be applied to any two fields in the database. Yes.
Okay. Let's see. I think we might be at the end of our list now. Yep, I think that is it, Scott.
Okay. Wonderful. Thanks for all the great questions. You got me thinking again, and I'll probably even update my little presentation because you reminded me of some FAQs. So thanks, everyone, for attending today and asking great questions and giving us your attendance. Anything else, Bree, before we wrap up?
No. Any questions? We'll look into, I can't remember what the question.
a
technical question. Yeah, we'll look into that and get back to you with a personal email. So
absolutely, absolutely. We know people who know the answer. That's better than making something up. So
all right.
Well, thanks again, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.